welcome to this October 19th meeting of the Charlotte City Council Budget and Effectiveness Committee. We'll do introductions first. My name is Ed Driggs. I chair the committee. If the people in the room could introduce themselves, please.
Hi, Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget.
Brent Cagle, City Manager's Office.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
And committee members online, if you would introduce yourselves, please.
Malcolm Graham, committee member.
Julie Iselt, committee member.
Renee Johnson, District 4 committee member.
Thank you. And do we have anybody else online? All right, I guess we're ready to go. We have only one agenda item today, so I think without further ado, I will turn it over to the city manager to talk about the proposed agenda for council's fall strategy meeting. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of Budget and Effectiveness Committee. It's good to be here before you today. What we typically do is provide you with an overview of staff suggestions as it relates to the retreat or the annual strategy meeting, or sometimes, I guess, recently we've had the fall strategy meetings. And it gives us an opportunity to run this by the committee with any additional changes before we would have a final agenda. So with that said, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the thought process behind the fall strategy meeting. The council has worked very hard with a series of what I would call key initiatives or priorities, such as affordable housing, corridors of opportunity, the transformational mobility network, the Charlotte 2040 plan in the UDO, as well as more recently, arts and culture, as well as Fire Charlotte. And so what we tried to do is go back and look at a number of council strategy sessions as well as business meetings to see where we were in many of these initiatives. And it became clear to us that two would seem to need more discussion or more guidance from the council, specifically because the council had mentioned that a couple of these initiatives, it's tough to get a lot of feedback at a strategy session or at a business meeting. So what I will do is
could I just note that Councilmember Ajmera has joined the meeting. So welcome, Ms. Ajmera. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what we're trying to do with this fall strategy meeting is to, again, provide council with an opportunity to discuss some key items, especially some of these key items that will have significant policy votes in the near future. One of the goals that I've learned over the past few years is that it's very important to allow the council to have a meaningful discussion amongst yourselves as opposed to a series of presentations from staff. So with that said, I would like to just go over the 3 days and try to get feedback from the committee. So the first day is really a travel day, and that will be October 25th. And so it's good we have it on the screen. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So we will be traveling to Winston-Salem. And one of the points being there, being at Winston-Salem is, as you know, there's a lot of discussion about Atrium and the combination with Wake Forest for the City of Charlotte's first medical school. And it gives us an opportunity to visit the Innovation Quarter, which is in Wake Forest. One thing that will occur is also an opportunity for both elected bodies, the City Council and the County Boards of Commissioners, to come together to take a tour. And that would be the Monday, October 25th, beginning at 2, ending at 4, as well as having an opportunity for networking on day 1. Day 2, we would start early, 8 a.m., and we'll continue to have a facilitator, but also a welcome and opening thoughts. And typically what we do is council may have some just thoughts about the previous day or some things that they would like to get out of the strategy meeting. And then it's really reaffirming the council priorities, and that's typically it helps the team, because as I mentioned earlier, we've been really focusing on 6 areas. Within those 6 areas, there's some subcomponents such as Safe Charlotte and what we're doing around the CAP. But just to make sure that we are continuously on the right path in terms of those key initiatives by the council, a couple of years ago, we began to discuss other initiatives such as a job strategy, which is Hire Charlotte, as well as what we would do in arts and culture. So again, very meaningful discussions come out of this time of year. The next piece, while it's called Working Together, it's really a lot more, I guess, broad than that. So it's not just how the council works together, but it's actually how the council is going to work together, govern itself as we go through what I would call an unprecedented time, where you will have a spring election versus a November election. So with that, there are a lot of things that we'd like to gain a better understanding of how the council would like to operate. Things from town hall meetings all the way to a budget development process that would be right in the middle of a campaign season, if you will. Then we always give you an update on the financial condition of the city. We'll let you know where we ended the most recent fiscal year, FY21, which ended June 30th, as well as give you a little bit of insight of where we think we're heading in terms of our revenue and expenditures for the upcoming budget development cycle. We always, are hopeful that we end the fiscal year with a surplus. So I'll do a little spoiler alert. Forgive me, Ryan. We are trending towards having that surplus, as well as having a conversation about this latest batch of stimulus funds that we talked with you a little bit about this summer. As you may recall, we have $71 million that came in this first batch, May of 2021, that we discussed areas such as housing and workforce and business development, as well as what we could do in terms of some of our community vitality initiatives. We would then tackle 2 of the big issues that's before the council. As I mentioned earlier, the key initiatives, I believe there's always, I would say, an opportunity to discuss many of the key initiatives, whether it's corridors of opportunity, affordable housing, or even arts and culture or Hire Charlotte. But we believe because of the ask of council potentially to have either deep discussions or maybe even a policy vote as it relates to the regional mobility initiatives or the Charlotte land use and mobility initiatives, I think it's important to carve out some time for that type of discussion. And then we'd have a recap of the day. And then lastly, on day 3 of the strategy meeting, we would have a major projects update for council, which is something we would do typically at a annual strategy meeting. So, Mr. Chair, that is the proposal. Again, we try to get a great deal of guidance from this committee before we would move forward with any final agenda. So I will, if it's fine with you, Chairman Driggs, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Could we go back to the first slide, please? So will you have a proposal that you want us to respond to about working together? I mean, we need to identify the issues and frame that conversation a little bit as opposed to just rolling it out on the floor. So are you going to highlight some issues or talk about why we need to have this conversation? Like what happens because we're having the election when we are, and I think the budget is one issue, but also the progress of the 2040 plan. You alluded to town halls. Is it within our authority, for example, as a council, to waive the ban on town hall meetings during the 6 months running up to an election so that we can engage with the public on the 2040 plan and the UDO?
So Chairman Driggs, that's precisely the guidance that we would need during this strategy meeting, because absent that, we would just go back to what rules were in place currently, which really don't work right now, but that would be our starting point. Typically there would not be town hall meetings in the months of, July through October, I believe, because that would normally be the election season. So whether or not you'd like to take those types of rules and apply them to the spring election season would be very important, because we're operating somewhat under that current system. So we need guidance there. And as you mentioned about the budget, I will tell you it's probably going to be one of the more stranger budgets that we put together, because again, typically there's not a primary or there's not an election in the spring. And my understanding, based on a path that the council may take, the election would be April 26th. And so when the next council is seated, we're not sure when that date would be. So just being able to understand how you'd like to proceed in October, as opposed to having the discussion in the spring, would be very important.
Thank you. And I'll just keep talking unless hands come up. So let me know, committee, if you have questions. But the deep dive on Charlotte land use and mobility initiatives, is this the UDO and the policy map? Is that what we mean by land use?
Yes, exactly, Mr. Chair. So as we talked a little bit about those two items at the last business meeting, we wouldn't be constrained with this discussion. And I think we've set aside a couple of hours for just that for the retreat. Yes, sir.
So as you know, a concern of mine is that we have a reasonably structured conversation, but that it not consist of slideshows that take up most of our time. So we're looking for that. As far as I'm concerned, we're looking for that sort of middle ground where issues are kind of brought up and rolled out, and we then have some latitude to interact with each other to resolve the questions that you might offer or questions that might come up. So I think that's a very suitable area for us to be talking about. It's a huge area. I can tell you that as far as I'm concerned, I find it's a little difficult to digest the UDO, all 600 pages of it, and come away with kind of opinions about where it works and where it doesn't. I think it would be useful, as I had suggested in a meeting, if we had a kind of user guide to go with it that was like a 12 or 15 page explanation of some of the important provisions or how it's different from our existing regulatory framework. And that might be a way that we can have a conversation at the retreat about issues that we might have related to the working of the UDO, or whether or not there are conflicts in it. I haven't had time yet to get a lot of feedback from some of the people I rely on for input on that. But I have had some reactions, I think we all have, to the policy map, and some things in there that people regard as anomalous, I guess I'll put it that way. So I don't know, and I asked the committee here as well, how should we approach this topic at the retreat?
Well, I'll chime in just from my perspective, and I have already brought this up, so I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but in the case of some neighborhoods, they have come up with a list of the mapping on a parcel by parcel basis of properties that were not labeled correctly. I have gotten comments from other parts of town about inconsistencies, and again, inaccuracies on the labeling. And so I guess the biggest question is to really understand, how can we really understand how those will be handled? Because at the end of the day, it's that initial match that is going to drive everything else. And people just need to know that it's labeled fairly adequately as a starting point.
And I think the process that we have for taking on board feedback that we get, I mean, there are some issues, I said anomalous, there are some issues in the map that are really just hard to understand. Frankly, it's not a question of somebody's individual interest. And I do have a personal example there. One side of my street is designated N1 and the other side of my street is designated N2. And I can't identify any difference between the two sides of the street that would cause them to be assigned different place types. So I think there's scope for a good conversation there. And what we would really be talking about is the dynamic, the process through which, as we hear some feedback about the map, we are able to modify it and at least rectify what can be recognized as manifest errors. Yes.
So that's very important. And one of the reasons why we have this feedback. So we will build into the agenda, if from hearing you correctly, use a guide, maybe some important provisions. We'll do it as a pre-read so that it's something that you have before you even get to the strategy session, as well as how any discrepancies will be handled. We'll make sure that we have whatever feedback we have up to that point that we'll share with the council, and this is helpful.
So, I mean, that's my suggestion. If anybody on the committee disagrees, please speak up, but because we didn't take a vote or anything, but that's just some feedback from me. The other point I would make was related to the regional mobility initiatives. So are you going to be looking for decisions from us or for like, what is the expected outcome of that conversation? We have been briefed, I think, at prior meetings about some of the things that are going on and the role of the alliance and some of the financial analysis that the consultants did. But what are we going to try to accomplish at the retreat with respect to those?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. What we'll try to do is pick up where we left off June 28th, when we had a public discussion about the Transformational Mobility Network. Our goal is to also bring our partners in, including the Alliance, so the Alliance can bring council up to speed about their role in terms of advocacy, as well as to have this short discussion about Connect Beyond, which is much bigger than the Transformational Mobility Network, which is locked into Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, but to talk about this in terms of 12 counties and 2 states. So one of the things that we left off back in June with the discussion, there were some concerns about some of the modeling and some concerns about the assumptions. We'd like to update you on the assumptions and what we're doing with the modeling. We did talk about having 4 scenarios as it relates to, moving forward. We believe there's an opportunity to also get input from the council about how you would like to go about those scenarios. So, and maybe the most important thing, Chairman Driggs, is we've talked a lot about the transit piece with this Transformational Mobility Network, but there are a number of transportation projects that would be impactful for the city, the county, and the towns as it relates to greenways and sidewalks and bike paths and roads, to say a few. So that's kind of our thought process to, again, not spend, like you said earlier, a bunch of time speaking at you when making presentations, but bringing you up to speed and then opening up the discussion to see where you'd like to go as it relates to the TMN and Connect Beyond.
So are you expecting to have somebody from the Alliance, for example, on hand to speak, or are we going to hear entirely from our own staff?
No, we would have someone from the Alliance to speak, as well as we would have someone to address the council as it relates to Connect Beyond, the more regional 12 counties, 2 states approach. So you'll get a number of faces that are not just city staff.
Okay, and I will keep talking unless I see a hand go up. The federal money, the $71 million, is that basically in a bank account somewhere since May, or what's the status on that?
Yeah, that is correct. What we are finding is that many jurisdictions across the country have been a bit slower to deploy these funds than they did with the CARES funds. One of the things that we've been trying to do, and I think it has been successful, is to see how we can work with the county and CMS with all of these funds to see if there are items of mutual interest that we can work together with. So I believe the last time we spoke about these funds may have been over the summer. We tried to have a discussion about the 71 million, which is 60 million is associated with external facing functions in the community. But I think we had a little bit over scheduling at a meeting, but this is a great opportunity for us to speak with you. I will tell you, we'll pick up where we left off, which is, basically, I think we were looking at maybe $20 million related to housing and homelessness, and $16 million associated with workforce and business development. And then community vitality, I believe we had the remainder, if that's $24 million or whatever the math works out to be. And we talked about things like the YMCA, the digital divide, what we could do with some of our, community safety, as well as what could we do with some of our other community partners that we were successful with in the first round.
So I have Ms. Ajmera.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Drick's question. So how long has it been we received $71 million?
So I would say, while maybe the last time the council had a discussion about the funds was this summer, I'm not so sure that we're in a bad position in terms of the collaborative efforts, because the county and the school system is still working with us about opportunities for partnership. Again, where we ended that evening was there were some council members that were ready to approve the entire 60 million. Some council members who said, well, let's talk about this and maybe send some of these items to committee. But it's pretty consistent where we were the last time we discussed this with you, which I believe was over the summer.
So it's been about 4 months since we received those $71 million from the Fed. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if it's, so we received the funds about mid-May, if that's the question that you're asking me.
So, I mean, it's been 5 months. I know there are some local organizations that have asked for funding because of the impact they have had, especially the YMCA with their youth engagement program. So I think it's important to deploy the dollars that we can today. I mean, if it's just sitting there, I understand the value of collaboration, and that's key, so that we can actually go further with meeting our community goals. But at the same time, I think we got to balance it with the timeliness. Thank you.
So Ms. Ajmera, I'll just point out, this conversation is about the agenda for the retreat. So I think that's a very pertinent comment when we have that conversation at the retreat. And I would want to make sure that all of our colleagues get the benefit of that observation. And it's kind of the same direction I was driving as well, that we need to get an update there. But meanwhile, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks, Mr. Driggs. Yeah, one of my questions was going to be about, hopefully we can get some decisions done on this funding, whether or not, I guess my question is, how long do we wait for the city, for the county and the school board? If they're not ready to act, at what point do we say, well, we got to go on our own then and do something? So that was one question I have.
So Mayor Pro Tem, may I address that?
Sure.
Because we're having good collaboration. I don't want that to go to the wayside. There are probably two initiatives out of all of these that are in that collaboration bucket, maybe two or three. The vast majority of these have little to do with that. And whenever the council is ready to approve them, we could approve them. They could be approved. So I don't want you to think the whole 60 million is tied up in collaborative efforts. The vast majority of the funds are not.
Okay. So to that point, whatever we can get done because it's ready to go, let's go ahead and do it. And that, that's just my 2 cents on that one. But my other question back to the mobility issue is we talked about last time, the need to have some kind of scheduling so that we can better understand, if we get the different scenarios, if we can get the sales tax, if we can't get the sales tax, that kind of thing. Scheduling out the different spending scenarios, if you will. What are the outlays each year? What are they going towards in particular? As you know, I think a lot of council members support me on this. What would be our plan to invest in our bus system if the fact of the matter is that we can't consider any options but the sales tax? Then we know that we're not going to invest in our bus system for a couple years, unless that's not true, unless there's another option, in which case I don't feel well versed at all as the chair of TAP on what the future of Envision My Ride is, what the investments are going to be, and what it's going to get us. And so I very much would like to know, what is the status of Envision My Ride as it stands now? What would we hope to accomplish 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and what would it take? Because at the end of the day, council will have to be the ones to decide, do we want to invest in our bus system and make it more robust? What would it take? What does that look like? How do we get down to cutting our wait times in half, and what kind of an investment does that require? So I hope that we can have that for this retreat.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, that would be one of the discussion points and maybe even a part of a pre-read to show what the 1 cent sales tax is able to do, not just in terms of high capacity rail, whether it be the streetcar or light rail or commuter rail, but there are some things that could immediately impact something that's important to, I think, the entire council and definitely the team, is that how do we get more frequencies in the bus system? So that would be a part of the discussion at the strategy meeting.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
1 second, Mr. Judy. I appreciate that. I just have to say, I feel like there's a little sense that it isn't the top priority. And if I'm wrong about that, then please just spell it out for me. I'm just I look at things pretty cut and dry. So if that's incorrect, then perhaps it's because we just don't know what the future of our bus system is. So, again, if we could get that. And then the second question I have is this an open discussion, or, is the media there? How is that working? Is any of this closed session?
So,
Atrium and whatnot.
Sure. So, in terms of, let me see if I can do these in order. So in terms of the bus system being a priority, absolutely. The day that the city begins to collect the sales tax, and let's use for an example, if the referendum, if we went through all the steps, the referendum passed in, let's say, November of 2022, there's a scenario where the jurisdiction, the county, would be collecting sales tax by July 1 of 2023, and immediately there can be advancements to the bus system. Some of this is related to the additional buses that CATS has, that all you need are drivers to drive those buses to help with frequency. So that's something that can happen immediately. But then over the course of the next few years, not decades, but few years, there are the opportunity to buy more buses and to have individuals drive those buses that could get those frequencies up, I believe, on 22 different corridors. So it would be as immediate as anything that would be immediate related to the collection of the sales tax. The second piece, as it relates to the meeting, because you will have the city and the county, Donata, help me if I have this right, the county going on the tour, and because there are multiple elected officials, that would be open to the media.
Correct.
Okay. And then the meeting would be like any other strategy session where any item that's in open session would be available for the media, but any item that's in closed session would not be.
Correct.
Okay. But from what I'm looking at on this slide, and I've been asked this by the media, full disclosure, on this slide, this is all like a big strategy session, correct? From what we're looking at.
Yes, with one exception, we do have a closed session on that Wednesday, but for all other items, that's a good way of looking at it. Just think about this as an extended strategy session. These would be the items that would be discussed.
Okay, thank you.
I wanted to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So would council be able to take an action on any of these items that we discuss? Is that part of the agenda? Because I know we are talking about the $71 million. So if council doesn't have any objections, I was wondering if that could be part of our agenda, if council is ready to take an action.
So I believe I'm right with this. Council has already taken an action to receive the $71 million and have that appropriated. So much like the CARES funds, what I committed to the council is that we wouldn't spend any of this until we came back to you. Much like the CARES funds, there weren't, let's say, ordinances that were put together that would come to a business meeting to have a vote. What you did with the CARES funds, what I believe you said you would do the same thing with the ARPA funds, and that at any meeting you could give us the go ahead to approve any item. So to your point, it is, when we talk about it, if you wanted to spend the money for the Y, a majority of you could give us the nod and we could go do that immediately.
Okay, so what I hear you say is we don't need to take an action, just sort of head nod saying that's okay.
And that's how you handle the CARES funds, maybe with one exception. And going into the ARPA funds, that was what we always understood would be the way the council would handle it.
I remember it differently because I think we had committees, or not committees, the task force, and each task force was sort of was laying out timeline and how it would be distributed and so on. You know, with this one, we certainly don't have a task force. So I wasn't sure what was going to be the process, like if council needs to provide a direction on and then need to take an action. So we did that with the last CARES dollars at the committee level.
So the last time, Councilmember Ashmore, that we talked about the CARES fund, the ARPA funds, and this is to some extent why we are where we are today, was that there were some council members that were willing to vote the 60 million that night to move forward with the recommendation. There were some council members who said, let's go back and do task force again. And some council members said, absolutely not. And the options were for us to bring it back, and you could vote all of it up or down or portions of it, or you could send it to committees for the committees to discuss. I do believe that evening the council was not interested in having task force reestablished. As a matter of fact, I think the individual who suggested it at the end of the meeting basically took it off the table. However, if the council wants to establish task force again to do the ARPA money, it is totally your purview.
No, I just want to make sure we are able to take an action if council desires to take an action at our retreat. I mean, that's all. And to follow up on Mayor Pro Tem's question around mobility, I know we have been focused on the bond referendum, the sales tax bond referendum. I know Mayor Pro Tem has asked about alternative. So is that something that you all would be presenting us, that here is an alternative potential way to figure out funding issue?
So, Councilmember Ashmore, I would start off by saying no, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't change. So let me tell you why I start off that way. The last time we discussed this, June 28th, the concept was for us to continue moving forward with the 1 cent sales tax to see to what extent we could refine numbers and to see to what extent we could have a, let's say, a better breakdown of how much of it was related to transit. And when I talk about transit, it's all of the rail systems, commuter rail, light rail, streetcar, as well as the bus system and our bus priority system. And then when I talk about transportation, we're talking about roads and sidewalks and bike paths and the greenways and bike facilities. So we've been working on trying to refine those numbers. If at any time the council says we don't want to depend fully on the 1 cent sales tax, give us some other options, we would do that also. I would just suggest that right now there are a number of entities that are looking at this with the 1 cent sales tax. And I would just recommend that let's let that run its course a bit before we start talking about a different funding model. But if that's the will of the council, we can, part of the Charlotte Moves Task Force was trying to go through all of these to come up with maybe the best option. And that's what we've been doing with the Transformational Mobility Network, which is the new branding, as we think about this as bigger than Charlotte, but all of Mecklenburg County and the 6 towns, is we've been looking at this through a sales tax lens.
That's fine. I mean, I don't want to take away from the TMN discussion because I think that's going to take up quite a bit of time. So if we start looking at other source of funding, that could pull away from the timing that is dedicated to this. So we can certainly discuss that, I guess, during the budget season, if this doesn't work out for us. Thank you.
So, Mr. Manager, I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem about the buses. The buses are sort of a potentially powerful response that can be realized in a relatively short time frame to some of the issues, the challenges we face today. And before we had the Transformational Mobility Network, we talked about how it would take $100 million of capital and $30 million in round numbers of operating expense to achieve a certain density of service. And my concern is that if we focus entirely on the sales tax, it's an uncertain prospect in my mind. That is a big lift, and we may get less, for example. So I think at the retreat we should just talk about what our options are in the near term. My understanding of the situation at CATS is that their capital capacity is pretty much tapped out with Blue Line debt, and they don't have a lot of spare room in the operating side. So it would be a challenge to come up with a remedy that doesn't rely on additional revenue. I get that, but I don't want us to appear to be sitting here and thinking only in terms of a sales tax and send a message, for example, to the legislature that we are proceeding on the assumption that that's a given. Anyway, I think that will be a robust conversation at the retreat. We don't need to cover the topic. One other thing I did want to mention, though, was on the federal money. We chose through our task forces and through our process with CARES to target small businesses, housing. We focused on the airport. I don't know that I understand what the status is of those priorities that we established then. Mr. Graham, I don't know if I can't see your face right now. If you're hearing, the ban on evictions has ended. Is that right? And are we hearing anything about a whole lot of problems that are created because evictions can now move forward? And should we be thinking of allocating funds to relief to that?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Riggs. Yes, there are still a number of organizations, agencies in the community as a whole are very impacted by the eviction moratorium being not in effect anymore. And so I still believe, as well as members of the committee, Great Neighborhoods Committee, that there is still a lot of resources needed in the community to help in that regard, especially as we kind of go into the winter season. That's going to be an issue. Also, there's the homeless task force that's been meeting for the last several months that at some point will be coming forward with some type of request, I imagine. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes, there's still a need out there for support.
So, Mr. Graham, if you agree, I would propose that at the retreat, we talk about the situation with housing, and maybe we look at the situation of small businesses, and we just get an update on the needs that we identified for CARES money, and try to recognize if there are acute situations that call for greater urgency on our part, and where we can give ourselves more time to pursue the cooperation strategies. Does that make sense, committee?
I think that's a fair request to make, and I know the management team has been looking at a number of these issues I just referred to in terms of homelessness, as well as what's happening in the community relating to still needing support for moratorium relief, rent relief, etc. So I'm almost certain that we can put something together, staff in conjunction with the committee, in terms of reporting out what's on the horizon for the next 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, going into the new year.
So, Mr. Manager, does that sound feasible to you?
It absolutely does. So I guess, Mr. Chair, to go back to Ms. Ajmira's question, the $60 million is, I don't know if you can say extremely reflective, but it's reflective of the conversation that we're having now. We did go back and look at how we deployed the CARES funds. We did talk to staff. We did talk to many of the recipients. That's why 20 million of the 60 that we presented to you is related to housing and homelessness. We still have another $12 million left over that's related from ESG, and another $2 million that's related to CDBG. In terms of that workforce and business development pot, there was funds set aside for small business, for hotels. I think Chairman Driggs, you were the first one to say maybe that's not enough for hotels. So all of those in Hire Charlotte, the jobs initiative, in the community vitality. We did the why. We did, again, a lot of things around safety and also around some of our community partners. So I believe that once we show that to you again, you're going to find that we did a lot of the tough lift to give you something that was consistent with some of the needs that are out there. The one thing I will add to that is that, as Councilmember Graham said, we do have that 2025 plan that's coming out, I believe, at the end of October, and which is right around the corner. And that should give us a better insight of what we're dealing with as it relates to homelessness, some of the evictions, things of that nature. So I feel that we're not in a bad place. Maybe it's just shifting some of the funds around as opposed to missing out on the key topics that you said are important to this body.
So to Ms. Ajmira's point, though, I'm not aware right now of a proposal that is actionable, that would be actionable as soon as at the retreat, i.e., it seems to me that we would need to have a little bit of development of an idea for deployment of funds, amounts, conditions, the beneficiaries, the distributions. So I hope that we'll, at the retreat, we'll be able to talk about nearer term things that we can do in addition to the process that you've described for cooperation with the governments. Because frankly, if there's too much of a spotlight on the question of how long we've had the money, I think some people will, want us to move more quickly.
Sounds good.
Okay. So committee, those are some things that we've been told. Does anybody have thoughts about things that have not been mentioned that we might recommend for the retreat? Are there other topics? I'm thinking of public safety or, some of the issues, the stormwater question that we've debated. There are a lot of subtexts within the UDO that we can cover in that segment. But is there anything missing from this agenda?
Yes.
Nothing. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Yes, Mr. Graham?
Yeah, nothing missing. I just want to kind of amen what you said earlier in the meeting about, and I think the manager's already agreed to do it, which is really kind of giving us an executive summary for that UDO. I heard that earlier in the meeting. I didn't make a comment then, but I think it's really, really important. Not only do we simplify it for the council members, and I started reading it the other day, and it's a bit much, right? But I know I'm obligated to do it, so I'm trying to work my way through it. But it would certainly help if there was a guide, and so I concur in terms of what you said in reference to that. And hopefully, there's a time on the agenda where we can just, Mr. Managers, just have what I would call a what if session for about 30 minutes. What if we did this? What if we did that? Give the council an opportunity to kind of to brainstorm and bring some other ideas to the forefront that's been in the parking lot that we might want to consider in reference to special projects or initiatives, etc. So I hope there's some time where we can just kind of think out of the box a little bit and just kind of throw some ideas on the wall and see what sticks. And it may or it may not, but it will be certainly, I think, for me to kind of throw some things out there and see what my colleagues think about them. That's it.
I would like that too. Who's up? Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you. Just to follow up or to piggyback off the discussion for the needs surrounding COVID, I'd like an update, Mr. Jones, on the status of the outstanding water bills from the city and what the plan is now for individuals who have outstanding water bills. I know that the moratorium on disconnections for water bills has expired. So I'd like to hear more about that at the retreat as well.
Yeah, we will roll that up under the ARPA discussion, yes.
Good. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes, so Mr. Drakes, I didn't see anything on the agenda on safety topic. I know that the committee is discussing the speeding on our streets. I mean, that's that's really an issue that affects quality of life. I mean, safety. So I don't know how committee feels, but we got to address that problem. And I know committee is working on it, but I do see this opportunity that as a council, we can also discuss this and see what other ideas our colleagues have.
Mr. Manager, do you have a response on that
Yeah.
one?
So, Mr. Chair, I think that would be the first edition that's not going to be taken up under one of the items that it's already listed. And I've done this long enough to know that suggesting to not put something on the agenda is not that wise. My question would be, because there's this process that it's in the committee, and I thought the committee had 60 days to report out, with the council be getting in front of.
Sorry, they were to report out in December.
In
Yes, sir. So they have a strategy session. They can discuss it in December as well.
Okay, so we could definitely add some time to the agenda. I think there's a pathway forward for that. But if the council believes if this committee believes that pathway forward needs to be expedited in some way, we could add it to there. But I would just recommend that, maybe an update at the next strategy session from the committee that's working on it. Could that fulfill the request, Councilor Mashmira?
Well, yes and no. We did discuss it today. And really, the challenge comes down to there are two things. One, 95% of the speeding fatalities or the crashes we are seeing, it's a human error, and 5% is everything else. So yes, we are working on really the 5%, which is the Vision Zero, street lights, sidewalks, and so on. But that's not going to be addressed with the funding that we have at this point. So I think we really need a sustainable solution because of the backlog that we have. And I've raised this as an issue today at the committee, where $2 million for street lights under Vision Zero bucket is not going to solve the problem that we have right now. So since we are discussing the TMN and so on, it goes all together. It's all part of the long-term solution we got to find to make our streets safe.
So what
We need to try and get a consensus about this one. That is an ongoing council conversation that's in committee. My concern here is I don't think there's a silver bullet. We could kind of sit together and tackle this thing and talk about it. I think we need to have an ongoing effort in this area, which we have at the moment, and maybe allow the council in the course of its ordinary meetings to kind of get on this topic and stay on it. It's not a one-time conversation, but I'm interested to know what other committee members think about that.
I would say I'm very interested in the topic, and I don't know the right process to move it forward, because I don't really feel like it's been, over as long as I've been on council, I have brought it up sporadically, and there just hasn't seemed a will, frankly, to do a deep dive into whether or not we have options here from a technology standpoint, at least. So I'm very much supportive of it if the council is. If the council's not, then it's not. But so I appreciate you bringing it up, Ms. Ashmira.
And Mr. Driggs, I would agree also. These are immediate needs that our constituents, that concern our constituents today. And we're getting those emails constantly. And even before I was on council. So I think it would be okay if we took a deep dive or got more information on this subject. I mean, if you look at the agenda, we've got quite an extensive presentation on the TMN and other issues. Perhaps, Mr. Jones, we could shorten that presentation since those are future needs, and we know that we'll discuss that more times in between now and any referendum. If we address some issues that are burning for the citizens and for council members.
So I think, Mr. Manager, without a vote, I can take that that's a recommendation from the majority of the committee. And I'm certainly not opposed to it. So maybe we can think about how to address the topic. Basically, the full council would need to get caught up on what's already going on and then have an opportunity to talk about things that we might be missing.
So, Mr. Chair, I could cut a series of 15 minutes out of a series of these agenda items and set up an hour to talk about speeding, if that's the will of the Budget and Effectiveness Committee.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is just such an important issue right now. I mean, we are all getting a lot of emails about this, and we got to address this. So, and I do see this discussion and how that's all going to tie to TMN discussions. I mean, it goes hand in hand. If you don't have safer streets, if you don't have sidewalks and the street lights, that all contributes to some of these fatalities. Well, some of the fatalities. Then I don't know how people are going to get to the light rail station if you don't address some of these issues that need to be addressed first.
So, Mr. Chair, if it's fine with the committee, if we just erase the recap at the end of day one, and then I find another 30 minutes to add to speeding, and we would add speeding as an item on the agenda. Does that help? And for an hour.
Without objection, I think that's a good plan. Mr. Graham, do you have an objection? Does anybody disagree with that?
I don't disagree, but I think we're talking about more than speeding. We're talking about the drag racing and the safety overall of the safety initiatives, I think, is what we're asking for. Is that right, Ms. Ashmere and Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, drag racing, speeding, fatalities, all of that. I mean, it all falls under one bucket of how do we keep our streets safe?
So I would just ask for a little bit of clarification, Mr. Chair. So there's Safe Charlotte that's big. It has community initiatives, violence interruption, violence intervention. I don't think that's what I'm hearing. I think what I'm hearing is street racing, right? And speeding.
Traffic safety, it's a Vision Zero type of thing.
Okay.
Yes.
But with a special emphasis on the shorter term problems because of the surge in street racing. We've had so many complaints about that, but I think it's all part and parcel. So it's kind of, what are we doing about the general issue of driver inattention, drinking, all of the causes of fatalities, and what we know that there was a specific initiative related to street racing. There was a sweep that was done, but we'd like to be able to talk about what things we're not doing yet that we ought to be considering, that we might want to consider.
Okay, that we'll do that.
And I don't know that it really even takes an hour. I mean,
well, I wondered that too. Do we need a full hour committee?
it's not like it's real debatable. I mean, people either feel it's important enough to look into or not. And then it's just, if an expression of the council that this is important to us would indicate that staff would come up to say, here's our plan, here's how we're going to look into it. And, you know, as long as we have just the time to say, it's about the street racing, about red light running, it's about speeding, it's, you know, and get it out there to make sure that we know what we're talking about. I don't see that that takes more than 30 minutes. And then you have, either you have marching orders or you don't,
So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm really getting confused. because there was a referral, the referral went to a committee to talk about this. And I believe what I'm hearing is that it's significant enough to talk about. So I'd like to carve out enough time to talk about it. And I think an hour may not be enough. I just want to make sure that I'm getting the feedback from this committee, which I think you want a deep dive, and I don't know how we do a deep dive in something less than an hour.
I concur, Mr. Manager. I can take about 20 minutes of that hour. So, I mean,
Okay, I don't want to cut. I certainly didn't mean
yeah,
that.
I think an hour is appropriate, and I think it's just really an update, and again, giving the council the ability to express the concern publicly once again, and just a status update, and any other issues that members may want to put on the table regarding the topic. So I think an hour is probably appropriate, council members, because knowing our council, everyone's going to take about 10 minutes to kind of express their opinion about it, and that's about an hour and 10 minutes right there.
So,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Graham, are you suggesting that members of this council are not terse and concise?
Yes.
So, Mr. Manager, I agree with that. I think the risk here is that a number of things that we have already been told not that long ago about the status of Vision Zero, about the issues around the lights and things, we've been through a lot of that. So I think the purpose of this meeting is to kind of acknowledge this subject, recognize briefly, things that we've discussed about the work that's going on, and give the council time to, express concerns or offer suggestions. This is a here and now issue, so I think the perception of our retreat will be helped by the fact that we're dealing with something like this, as well as these kind of big picture long-term plans.
Sounds good.
So let's say for an hour for that, without objection. And speaking of an hour, we've been here for an hour. So last chance to offer anything else, any other comments or input for the retreat. Otherwise, I think this meeting has served the purpose of allowing members of council to be involved in the design of the retreat, which is why we have this discussion. And unless there is something that somebody else has, are we ready to wrap up? Do I have a motion?
move to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor, turn off your TVs. Mr. Manager, thank you.
Thank you.
I think it was a good conversation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.